He is the West Point graduate who headed the Philippine Constabulary during martial law and led the military breakaway from the Marcos regime that sparked the EDSA revolution. He was appointed Armed Forces Chief and later Defense Secretary by President Cory Aquino, who then anointed him as her presidential bet in 1992. Under his watch, the Philippine economy was on the verge of attaining tiger status, if not for the Asian financial crisis of 1997. From the top general, he evolved into our top political leader and eventually our elder statesman. Many Filipinos consider him the best president we have ever had. With us tonight, former Philippine President Fidel Ramos. Good evening, Mr. President.
Good evening, Tony. Good evening.
Sir, what do you think is the greatest achievement as the Republic's 12th president?
The best accomplishment for which I can claim credit is strengthening the Philippine national team, consisting of all kinds of people. Class A, B, C, D, E, the very rich, the very poor, and the people in the middle. Plus, of course, the people in government, from the very top to the very bottom in the barangays, but especially the great majority of Filipino society, to which you and I now belong.
Okay. So, sir, that's actually speaking to the term, the current term, inclusive. It's an inclusive society.
Not exclusive, like the traffic regulations in Manila today.
Sir, conversely, what do you consider the worst failure of your administration?
Maybe it was the lack of effort to elect from my party my successor after my term of office. But you see, this is really the will of the people.
What about the possibility that we could have changed the system of government during your time? Was that a possibility?
Now you brought my favorite subject up, which is that we have been operating under an American-type presidential system which has not worked for us.
Yes.
And so, starting in 1991, I began my campaign on the transformation of the Philippine system of government into a parliamentary system. And I was supported by a tiny bloc in the House of Representatives, consisting of maybe 35 out of 250 members, led by the late Congressman Comong Sumulong of Rizal and a young legislator by the name of Jose de Venecia of Pangasinan, who later became Speaker.
Yes. But why did that small bloc fail in trying to bring that constitutional reform forward?
Because the people in general were not really prepared for it. Okay. We won the elections, true enough.
Yes.
And we developed a government team that came from all sources. In fact, I did not know beforehand 49% of those that I brought into my cabinet. But many I brought in because of their reputation, because of their track record, because of their character, call it, and also because of their affinity with the common people.
What was that vision you had at that time, sir? That sort of, I guess it was your rallying cry.
We called it simply Philippines 2000. Kaya natin to. We can do. We can handle it. Philippines 2000 because we were still in the 20th century, yes, or in the 90s, no? And we were ambitioning or aspiring to bring the younger Filipinos like you into the next century, which would start New Year's Day, year 2000. And so that was our battle cry. That would mean that by that time, Filipinos would be very competitive in the world because of their inborn skills as well as acquired skills due to their exposure in the world. We have one of the most traveled workforce in the world called overseas Filipino workers in 175 different countries. And again, this is so important because of our strategic, geographical, political position in the world. Geographical because we're in the center of the two biggest oceans of commerce, the South China Sea and the Pacific Ocean. Politically and culturally because we are familiar with European culture, Asian culture, oceanic culture, archipelagic culture. And we are the only Christian country in all of Asia.
So globalization, no, being world-class, being a globally competitive nation was one of the challenges. And so trade liberalization, deregulation, and regulatory reform, and particularly your regime is known for facing squarely the problem of monopolies and cartels. And that's why we had to put in these reforms. What was your own personal experience with facing that type of pressure or dealing with that type of pressure? And then now, what is the Philippines like? No, have we really improved, or is still there much to be done?
One of the most important planks or components of my campaign platform and also my period of 6 years as president was what we called devolution, democratization, decentralization, deregulation, and the sustainable development of our economy, meaning the 5 Ds, letter Ds of governance.
When we return, the man fondly called Tobacco will disclose his stand on current issues. Stay with us. You're still with Political Capital. This is Tony Abad, together with our guest, former President Fidel Ramos. Sir, very quickly, let's go through your stand on some raging issues. Number 1, the West Philippine Sea.
We must play our cards right because we are in between the pressures of the two superpowers, the U.S. on this side, China on this side. There should not be any shooting war between them because that will lead to World War III. Who wants World War III? Not the Chinese people, not the American people. They've suffered enough. And certainly not the Filipino people and other people. We all have suffered. We must understand the weapons of mass destruction now, 70 years after the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, are 5,000 times more powerful than the A-bombs 70 years ago. You have now nuclear bombs delivered not by B-29, but by an ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile, which will travel 10,000 miles at the press of a button. The point is, this is really just a little planet called Mother Earth and has many limitations on water, on food, on clean air, on minerals, but especially limitations on good people. And we must preserve it. And nobody now wants a total elimination or obliteration or erasure of Mother Earth, including the people.
So it's a peace, no? At all costs.
Perpetual or at least enduring peace and sustainable development. This is now the new track of the United Nations with their new 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Speaking of peace, Bangsamoro Basic Law and maybe the Mama Sapano incident.
The chances of the BBL being passed right now are very low. But they can be improved if this government goes after those that have been charged for murder in the Mama Sapano incident. And 90 have been identified by the Department of Justice.
Sir, what about the Freedom of Information Act?
That should have been passed a long time ago. That's even longer there in the agenda of our legislature than the RH law. Fortunately, the RH law was passed, although it's being hampered again by Supreme Court injunctions.
Yeah.
But the Freedom of Information Bill must be passed into law.
Sir, what do you think about the anti-dynasty bill?
The anti-dynasty bill comes out of the prohibition in the Constitution. Political dynasties are also economic dynasties. There are also media dynasties. There are also
Everything is
professional dynasties.
interconnected.
Yes. And it is time that this must be dismantled. Look at the advanced countries of Europe. They are mostly parliamentarian. And you don't have to spend so much to gain a national position of prime minister or president, because you are campaigning only in your small constituency or district. But of course, you must be the head of your political party.
Right.
That's the way it goes. But the most beautiful feature of the parliamentary is the combination of the lawmaking and the executive action, because as a new lawmaker, you are also given an assignment as assistant bureau chief in a small bureau. But after about 5 terms, you are already there as leader of the opposition,
Yes.
or shadow prime minister, or prime minister at age 42.
Sir, what about agrarian reform?
The agrarian reform was not really accompanied by the transfer of services, call it services and capabilities to the beneficiaries. Take the sugar industry, for instance. There's still plenty of unpartitioned or unreformed sugar lands. The product, which is sugar, cannot be retailed. It
Yes.
must be converted from cane to sugar for the table.
Yes.
And this means plenty of post-harvest facilities and mechanisms that must unfortunately require big capital. So we must be able to provide the post-harvest for those that will benefit from land reform. That is why it's been slow.
Sir, what is your view on mining and, I guess, natural resource extraction?
We passed the mining law in 1995. It required a lot of further litigation, call it, all the way up to the Supreme Court. But eventually, in 2006, our 95 mining code was ruled to be constitutional after 11 or 12 years. But the important thing there is the implementation, which means that you must not destroy the environment while you are doing mining. And you must therefore not only restore the geographical environment, but also the livelihood of the people, and do not destroy the culture of the people.
After the break, more of former President Ramos' stand on controversial issues. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still with Political Capital and our special guest tonight, FVR, the statesman. Sir, where are we now 26 years after the founding of the APEC? and 19 years after we hosted the APEC summit in Subic.
We are in a better global position in terms of the economy, in terms of democracy, and also in terms of culture, if I may say so.
Yes.
But we may be falling behind in terms of the handling of global terrorism. Of course, that is not APEC's main agenda. But in the earlier days, we did not realize the dangers of international terrorism in the same way that we understood the danger of environmental abuse, which leads to global warming and therefore super typhoons and super calamities. But taking the example of the experience of France, which suffered terrorist attacks of shootings, bombings, and just plain murder, resulting in 130 people killed and more than 300 wounded, 100 seriously. France itself, which is a superpower, was caught unaware. And besides that, this terrorist attack 12,000 miles away has impacted on us in the Philippines.
Yes.
In terms of focus of attention away from the economy to handling security matters.
Okay.
Secondly, in terms of maybe weaker trade and a weaker global economy in the next few years because of necessary investments in security mechanisms. And lastly, and I think this is the most important thing that the younger ones like you must understand, terrorism is one of the ever-present, common, universal threats against mankind today. Just like global warming, just like pandemic disease, just like corruption.
So let's think about inclusiveness and the often used inclusive growth term. No? Do you believe that APEC can actually help facilitate inclusive growth?
Yes, yes, very much so. By the lowering of tariffs,
Yes.
by the mobility of capital around the world, and the Filipinos have plenty to contribute to that. And lastly, the greater efficiency in production because of the the teamwork among various capabilities belonging to certain countries, no? And the closer bonding that will happen, not only among leaders, but also among people. I'm hoping for maximum success here in the Philippines because of APEC hosting. But let us not allow far out but globalized impacts to hit us. And we must always be prepared for the worst case scenario. That's a simple lesson in management.
Which requires a leader.
You don't have to be a leader to understand that. You can just be a common tao with good common sense.
In 2016, who do you think is the best bet?
Oh, let's go for the younger ones because if you're looking at the governments in Europe, it's led by younger people in a parliamentary system. David Cameron of the United Kingdom,
Yes.
Prime Minister at age 42, leader of the opposition and shadow Prime Minister at age 38. And the guys before him, Tony Blair, John Major, were the same. Look at Angela Merkel, Germany. My goodness. Galing. Very good. Brought together Eastern, Western, Communist, Democratic Germany into a government of national unity. Barack Obama was president even before he reached 50. But when I say let's go for the younger ones in the Philippines, I'm not excluding anybody.
Okay.
Because I'm saying, let's go for the younger ones, younger than me. But I have to see their birth certificates
if your vision is to come true about our next generation of leaders, looks like we really need to change our system.
You are putting together the leader personally and the system.
Yes.
We will enjoy our maximum, best, super leadership when we change our system of government to go into the parliamentary, which will lead to federalism. And then, in terms of the individuals, we do away with the political dynasties in the Philippines. Then we'll get the leader that we want. Kaya natin to. We can.
Thank you, sir. Among the country's living past presidents, FVR is the only one whose sterling reputation has remained intact. Beyond his term, he has maintained his stature and influence in the political sphere, and always with the nation's best interests in mind. He alone has demonstrated what a true leader should be: pragmatic, decisive, and with a vision for transformation and change towards the building of a real Filipino nation. Today, in this generation of Filipino leaders, Fidel Ramos is the last statesman standing. This is Tony Abad for Political Capital. Thank you, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.